Wasn't that lovely? Yeah, I sang some lovely songs there. Thank you, Stuart. Do you know, folks, I was musing there in that last song. Help us to be aware of your presence. Do you know, there is something, and we really should pray for that for us for today, you know, that we would experience God in some way today, because there's something about the touch of God on our lives that is unmistakable. If you ever have an experience with God, it is life-changing. I don't know how many of you have watched the Chosen series. You know, there's one beautiful moment in that. I think it might even be the very first episode, and there is this girl called Mary, and she is a troubled girl, and she's had a troubled life, and she's in a bad way. And from what I remember of the scene, Jesus walks up to her and he says one word to her. He looks at her in the eye and he says, "Mary." And when she looked at him, she saw two things in his eyes. Number one, he knew her. He knew where she was at. He knew everything about her. And the second thing she saw was that he loved her. And that changed her heart immediately. Do you know, folks, there's something deep within our soul that longs for those two things, to be fully known by somebody and fully loved. And that's what God does for each of us. When he touches our lives, he touches us with those two things. I know you. I know exactly what you've been through in life. I know what you're facing, and I know what's coming, and I love you. And that wins all of our hearts forever. So some beautiful, beautiful songs and some lovely deep thoughts that we have been singing about today. Good morning, everyone. My name's Gary. If you don't know me, absolutely lovely to have you here today. If you were here last Sunday, you will be aware that I kicked off with a new series I wanted to do. I don't often do series, but I was stacking up my thoughts and inspirations for what I wanted to speak about in the coming weeks, and the more I reflected on them, the more I realized really this is all about decisions and choices we make in life. So I began a series called Walking in Wisdom. You know what wisdom is, right? Wisdom is this ability to make the right choice in any given circumstance. In other words, for the best possible outcome in that particular circumstance, can I have the wisdom to make the right choice? And that's the kind of theme that we've been following, and we are pursuing that today. But I'm adding a deeper layer into what I spoke about last Sunday. So I hope you will find it inspirational for your life. Hazel and I have lived through this. It's been a lifesaver for us, and I hope you will embrace it for your life, and it'll be a lifesaver for you too. Have a look at this picture. Any of you recognize this fellow? I mean, he just looks like an average bloke, right? Just an average Joe. He was the world's richest man. This is John J. Rockefeller, I think. John D. Rockefeller is his name. So I want to tell you a little bit about him as an introduction to what I speak about today. He lived in the late 1800s and the early 1900s, and he amassed a fortune of about $900 million, which in today's money is worth billions and billions. He was a devout Baptist, so he was a Christian, and over his lifetime he gave away about $500 million to various charities and organizations. And he made his money in the American oil boom, which occurred in the 1800s. And the oil rush, from what I've read about it, was absolutely chaotic. When they discovered oil in America, everyone with some ambition rushed to these oil fields to try and begin digging, getting out the oil, refining it and selling it, because they saw such massive potential there. But it was chaotic. And most of the people who charged to these oil fields focused on two things. And the first one was speed. They had to get the oil out as fast as they could. They had to refine it as quickly as they could so that they could sell it and get the money. And of course, the only way they could do that was to borrow heavily. So most of them were in serious debt to try and get ahead of the pack in getting out the oil. But Rockefeller, who got involved as well, and he was just a humble bookkeeper in his day, he approached things differently. And the reason why was because he saw in the future that oil was going to become a staple for every household. So a lot of the other people were thinking short term. He was thinking very much long term. He said this is going to become a staple in every household. So he focused on things completely different to the rest of the pioneers that were pioneering this. He focused on cutting costs. He focused on efficiency. He focused on deliverability. So he made agreements with all the train companies to be able to deliver the oil. He managed contracts with them to make sure that the oil was delivered cheaply. And that set him apart from his competitors, not initially. But then what happened during the chaotic times was the oil price fell. And a lot of the competitors collapsed. They were heavily in debt. And he slowly bought them out until, get this, he owned 90% of the oil industry in America. Simply because he had a long-term vision and he could sense where this was all heading. And he planned for that eventuality, not short-term gain. So a remarkable man. And you know, folks, that ability to foresee the future, to understand what the future looks like, and to make decisions now for that is what the world calls foresight. Having the foresight to see something in the future. And in church circles, if you go around church circles, they will frequently use the term discernment. You know, it's this uncanny ability to sense things. How many of you, rather than foresight, have learned from hindsight what you should have done? Right? Okay. Most of us have gone that route in life, okay? Oh, I should have done that. You know, we learn from looking back rather than looking forward. But I want us to think about this, okay, this morning, folks. And do you know why? Choices and decisions that we make are imperative if ever we hope to do well in life. They determine the direction of your life. And you know, beyond that too, do you know what the uncanny truth about choices is? Choices that we make define our character. So our choices are a reflection of the kind of person we are. So if we make a succession of choices, that determines our character. And it's our character that determines the direction of our lives and our ultimate destiny. So if you want to shape the future, we've got to go right back to the basis of how do we make decisions? How do I make right decisions so that the future can look good for me? That's why this subject is so important. So folks, I wanted to talk about this uncanny ability to have foresight or discernment about what lies ahead. Do you know, from our personal experience, when we were living back in Zimbabwe, and we didn't recognize the consequence of it at the time, but there were two things that Hazel and I both felt really strongly in the early years of our marriage. Number one was that we should get out of debt. And then later on in our years, a very strong sense that trouble was coming. Those two things, you've no idea how they saved our lives, apart from God. And do you know what we did in those early years? Because we felt so convicted to get out of debt, we didn't do holidays. It may surprise you, we didn't do takeaways. We only ever had one takeaway while we were there, and that was because someone else paid for it. We skimped and scraped. We drove a banger of a car, but we paid off the mortgage on our house and got out of debt. Do you know, if we had not done that, we would have been in absolute massive trouble because of the trouble we ended up in. And just to give you an illustration from our experience, the year we left, inflation was running at 112%. Now, to put that in perspective, if you appreciate that inflation in one year gets compounded the next. This is what it was like living through that turbulent period. We had a 4-bedroomed house. The value of that house in 6 years' time was enough to buy half a slice of bread. That's what that level of inflation looked like. And that was when it was mild. You speak to Hazel's brother John, who lived for the years thereafter. The inflation ended up out of control into millions of percent. It just boggles the brain. But if we had been in debt during that tumultuous period, we would have sunk. So our bacon was saved by that conviction. And the second one was that trouble was coming, and we did everything we could to prepare for that and get ready for that, and it did come. So this notion of being able to sense and plan for the future is really important for all of us. I want you to think about it this morning. This is just a challenge, all right? Think through these questions and answer them to yourself, how you would choose in these scenarios, all right? Here's a question for you, okay? If you're dating someone and things are going well, and there's chemistry, you enjoy being together, and it feels like it could turn into something serious, would you continue investing your emotions, your time, and your future in that relationship? We would, right? We would. All right, let's change the context. What if you knew that this relationship would only be good for 5 years, after which your heart would be betrayed and broken? Would you continue in the relationship? See, we wouldn't. Same context. Nothing has changed. The only thing that changed was the future. Then you would change your decision. Let's have a think through another one. If you had extra money this year and your home was looking worn and tatty, would you invest it in improving your home, redecorating, renovating, making it more comfortable? Most of us would say, yes, I would. If you knew that you would be transferred through your job to another country within a few months, quickly and unexpectedly, would you still spend that money? You probably wouldn't, because the estate agents tell us you don't always recoup redecorating value on your house. All right, another one. If you were settled in a stable job, would you focus on climbing the ladder, working hard, gaining promotions, and building long-term success? You would. Let's change the context. If you knew your entire industry in your region was about to collapse or disappear in a year's time, would you still make those decisions? You wouldn't. You would retrain. What about this one? If an opportunity came up at work, a promotion, a step up, something that could really advance your career, but it meant longer hours, more pressure, and less time at home for a period, just for a period, would you take the job? Okay? Let's change the context. If you knew that someone you love, your spouse, parent, or child, had only 6 months to live, would you still make that decision? See, you wouldn't. You see, folks, so much of our decision-making in order to be successful needs to consider the context and the time we're living in and what the future looks like. Because your decisions would change depending on what that future outcome looks like. And so, folks, this is so important. I tell you what I've called my message today. Discernment for the times that we live in is what I've called my message today. And I want to explore this in the Bible as to how can we get that? How can we put ourselves in a place where we can sense and feel these things and make the right kind of decisions that will be best for the future, not just short term? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at a biblical example of this happening, and then I'm going to pull out a passage in the Bible that just offers some brilliant counsel on how we can make these kind of decisions. So let's go to a biblical example. So I'll give you the bit of the background here. So Jesus is speaking to his disciples, and he is talking about the future in this chapter. The whole chapter is about what's to come in the world. And he gives this example, and it's one of the most graphic examples of this kind of thing that we're talking about. He says this, Matthew 24:15-18. Speaking to the believers, the people who were following him at the time, he said this, "When you see standing in the holy place the abomination that causes desolation, spoken of through the prophet Daniel, let the reader understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee. Get out. Run. Let no one on the housetop go down to take anything out of the house. Let no one in the field go back to get their cloak. Flee. Run." That's what he said. Now he quotes this prophecy that had been given by Daniel hundreds of years previously. I've been reading through it at the moment. And basically it said there would come a time where the nation would be invaded, and they would invade the holy temple in which they offered their sacrifices, and everything was holy, and they would completely desecrate it. And this is what Daniel had warned years before would happen. So Jesus tells them here, he said, listen, when you see that, run. Well, most scholars tell you they believe that was fulfilled in AD 70, so about 40 years after Jesus had died. The Jews rebelled against their occupying power, which was Rome. They had a resistance, and the Romans sent their armies to squash it, and they surrounded Jerusalem. And they surrounded Jerusalem at a time when there was over 1 million people inside the walls of Jerusalem visiting. So there was tons of visitors inside, and they surrounded it. And if you read the historian Josephus at the time who wrote about it, folks, it was absolutely hideous what happened inside the walls. Because they surrounded it, they ran out of food. Starvation and famine hit the city. People began killing each other to steal food. There's the record of one woman killed and ate her child to survive. And the conditions were hideous. The Jews were killing each other as much as the Romans were about to do. And 1 million people in Jerusalem died during that time. When the Romans finally broke through the walls, they desecrated the temple, and the few survivors that they found, they sent off to fight in the arenas or took them away as slaves. It was desperate. But do you know what happened? The early historians, you know what they recorded? There was not one Christian in the town. They all fled. The moment they saw the armies coming, they fled. Now, folks, you think about that decision. You've got your livelihood in there. You've got your home, which you have just redecorated. You've got your bank with all your money stored in there. And you have a choice. Stay or flee and become a refugee. What would you choose? How many of you would have chosen flee and become a refugee? You see, that's wisdom. That's making the right choice in those circumstances. Lose everything. Preserve your life. And do you know, folks, do you know what is amazing? And I love that story because it's consistent with what Jesus promised he would do for you and I. Have a look at this verse, John 16, verse 12-13. This is one of the most greatest evidence of the love that God has for you as a person. This is what Jesus said to his followers. He said, he was about to leave, okay? He was going to be crucified and be gone. He said, I have much more to say to you, more than you can now bear. But when he, the Spirit of truth, comes, he will guide you into all the truth, everything you need to know. He will guide you into. He will not speak on his own. He will speak only what he hears. And listen to this. He will tell you what is yet to come. Is that not incredible? He can somehow give us a sense or a warning of what is to come so that we can prepare and plan for that and not just party our lives away living for the now and not thinking about the future. I find that a stunning promise. And you know, folks, isn't that consistent with what we read in the Bible? God did that constantly. He was constantly telling people what's coming. And there's some passages in the Bible which are for you and I, telling us what's coming. That's how much He loves us. Now, admittedly, I know that some things come unexpectedly without warning. That happened to us too. Does happen. But He can tell us. Do you know, I just want to throw this one out because I learnt this, folks, and this is really good. Do you know, in our last few years in Zimbabwe, I became very, very convinced, based on what I felt God was showing me, that trouble was coming. And at the time, our country was completely peaceful. There was no drama, and there was no problems. But I was convinced that's what God was saying. And I began to speak to pastors, well-respected pastors that I knew, and I said, I've got a feeling trouble's coming and we're going to have to leave. And they were saying the opposite. They said, I wouldn't go to the UK if I were you. And they started saying things like, no, God's telling me to stay. And it was really confusing as to why so many people had different voices. And you know what I've learned, folks, and this is really important. Whenever you talk about persecution of any kind, whether it be religious persecution, ethnic persecution, it's not often generalized. In other words, it doesn't affect everyone. It affects pockets and places and seasons. So some people will get caught in it and others will escape it. That's the way life works. And you know what I've come to learn, folks? I genuinely believe the warnings for Hazel and I to leave were so strong. I believe if we had stayed, something terrible may have happened to us. But it didn't happen to the people that stayed. And that's the skill we have to all learn. What do I have to do for my life? What are the choices I have to make that are right for my life? And we have to find that from God. God, what do I do for my life, my family? What is best? So it's a brilliant, hopeful verse there that He can show us what we should do. So folks, let's look for some practical advice here. And I found a passage that I think is excellent for you and I on counsel on how to make good decisions in your life. And when the pressure is on, like it was for us, that in that pressurizing time, you can make the right choices. And that you won't be foolish in not considering the future when you make those choices. Okay. Going to go to a book called Ephesians, a very personal letter written by the Apostle Paul to a church, and we're going to pick out a passage on what he said. And I want you to have a look at this. We're going to go through it verse by verse, okay? So verse 13 to 14, we're going to start there. It says this: "But everything exposed by the light becomes visible, and everything that is illuminated becomes a light. This is why it is said, 'Wake up, sleeper, rise from the dead, and Christ will shine on you.'" So let's go through that slowly, all right? Let's consider the first verse. It says there, everything exposed by the light becomes visible. What's he referring to there? He's referring to God's ability, and God only knows the future, His ability to illuminate to you and I things about the future which we cannot see because we don't live there. Spiritual realities, things about your circumstances, things about you, things that you can't see. God only has that knowledge, and He has the capacity to shine a light and make that visible to you. He's the only one who can. He's the only one who knows the future. And he says there, and then that becomes a light. In other words, that illumination becomes guidance for you in your life once you can see it. So God can do that. And then he says in the next verse, he says, this is why it's said. Can I dramatize it? Wake up! Wake up! Wake up! Rise from the slumber that you're in. Do you know, folks, I pondered on that so much, this drama. Wake up! Do you know why I think it says that, folks? Because when we don't have God in our lives, we are blind. We're blind. There is so much in life that we cannot see. Do you know what scientists are telling us? More and more as they explore quantum physics and things, do you know what they're coming up with? Which is what the Bible and Christians have been saying all along. We are primarily spiritual beings. We're not physical beings. And this world is primarily spiritual, not physical. And if all we do is shut God out of the picture, shut spiritual realities out of the picture, all we're left with is just what's visible. And we're blind to reality. We're not seeing reality. And that's why that verse says, wake up! You're asleep! And you know, folks, I think the wonderful encouragement from there is, he says that if you will wake up, he will shine on you. Now, folks, let's think that through just practically and realistically, okay? Let's imagine you're in a deep sleep, right? Do you wake yourself up in a deep sleep, or does usually something have to happen to wake you up? Usually something has to happen to wake you up. You don't wake yourself up in a deep sleep. Okay? Something has to happen. Like a mouse in the bed. That woke us up one night. Okay? In the bed, would you believe it? But something external usually has to wake you up. And folks, you know what? I'm telling you, the best thing you can do to ever wake up spiritually, get yourself involved in a church. Go to a church. Read your Bible. The truth in there will wake you up. How many of you began your journey by randomly deciding to go to church one day? Yep, it was my start. I had tried everything. Nothing seemed to work. And one day I met a girl who was so happy, and I was so miserable. And she said to me, you'll never find what you're looking for until you've met God. Go and look for him. So I thought I'll give it a go. Never tried that one before. And I walked into a church. And look where I ended up. It's because it woke me up. I saw and felt things I had never seen and felt before, and it woke me up. So folks, I genuinely believe going to church is such an important thing. Reading your Bible is such an important thing. Okay. So we've got to avoid the whole notion of, let's just carry on the way we are and not make any changes, okay? I think we've really got to say, all right, if there is a God, then I want to invite that God into my life. I want to invite the truth into my life, because that will wake me up. Don't just live on autopilot. Do something to invite that truth into your life. Okay, so he starts off with that counsel. You need to come to God, okay? And you can have a relationship with God, provided you put your faith in Jesus. That's what Jesus said. He said, if you believe in me, you will not perish and you'll have eternal life. You'll be forgiven, but you've got to believe in me. That's the starting point. We have to put our faith in him. And then in verse 15 to 16, he then builds on that notion and he says this, be very careful then how you live, not as unwise, but as wise, making the most of every opportunity because the days are evil. So let's consider that in a nugget. So what he says here is this, be very careful then how you live, not as unwise, but as wise. So the second instruction, okay, if you put your faith in God, then the next stage is this, be careful the choices you make in life, be careful how you choose to live. Don't do it unwisely. Learn about God and learn to do life his way. Okay, that way you don't leave God out of the picture of your life. That way you will live wisely, not foolishly. And then he goes on to say this, making the most of every opportunity because the days are evil. Do you know, folks, I think if there was a message I could preach from the rooftop to the entire UK population, it would be that one. Do not think that what you have today is guaranteed to last. We are not entitled to anything that we currently have in this country. We could lose it in a moment. And Paul recognized that. He said, days are evil. And do you know, folks, do you know what's fascinating? When you look at history, no empire has survived and lasted. No human kingdom continued in great prosperity indefinitely. Why? Because times of evil came. And things changed. So we can't assume that the money we have now, the career we have now, what we have now, it will continue in this fashion indefinitely. We cannot assume that. Because evil days can come and things can be lost and taken away from us. So consequently, we have to make the most of every opportunity that we have now. You don't know the day God will call you and you'll be out of here. You don't know the day of your death. You don't know the deaths of your loved ones. We don't know how much of our current prosperity in this country will last. We have to make the most of every opportunity. Do you know what that looks like in our lives? Hazel and I were just talking about that yesterday. Do you know, one of my regrets having left Zimbabwe was that we never toured the country and saw all the beautiful things that were there. And some of that was because we had no money. But we saw some beautiful places. But if you go on the internet and look at things like Victoria Falls, Great Zimbabwe, the game reserves are absolutely stunning in that country. And some of those we never saw. Do you know how that's shaped us now? Hazel and I were just saying yesterday, we don't have a desire for holidays abroad and sunshine. Do you know what we really want? To tour the UK. We'd love to see more of Scotland, more of the UK. Those are the things that now affect us because we don't want to miss this opportunity to see our own country because we've missed that once before. And so, folks, it's important for all of us. Don't take relationships for granted. Every day, try and live your life for good. Be kind to someone. Do something good for someone. Send someone a note. Pray for someone. Make the most of your life that you've got. Every day. Don't waste an opportunity. Right? Okay? Because we never know when we could lose something. Never. And you don't want to live with regret. So if you have money and a career, hold it lightly. It's not your savior. Okay? Things can be lost. God is far more trustworthy than any of these things that we hold on to. Okay, he then builds on to his argument and conversation in verse 17, so saying, therefore do not be foolish, but understand what the Lord's will is. And do you know, folks, that one statement, understand what God's will is for your life, is so important. The best possibility for you making any choice is to say, God, what would you have me do? What is your will for my life? And if you could commit to following God's will for your life, not your own, that is the best possible outcome for your life. Hazel and I have lived our lives that way, of doing what God told us to do. And we have the evidence and proof in our lives that God will take care of you if you do. God will take care of you if you do. So that's what we've got to seek in our lives. The greatest security in life is to do what God shows you to do. Okay. When we were skimping and scraping in Zimbabwe and driving a banger and having to park at the school where everyone was in their new 4x4s and their BMWs, and we were in an old Datsun rust bucket, 20 years old, parked next to them. And when we did one packet of crisps a week as a treat and cheese only once a week, and we didn't do holidays and we didn't do takeaways, it looked absolute crazy madness. But boy, did it pay off long term to get out of debt. Because that's what God told us to do. So follow his counsel and advice. in your life. He knows what is best. Regularly ask that question, God, what would you have me do? And try and follow that counsel throughout your life. And then he goes on in verse 18 to end off with this one, just as another contrast and another warning. He says, do not get drunk on wine, which leads to debauchery. Instead, be filled with the Spirit. So he contrasts these two fillings, if you like. One is fill your life with partying and drunkenness and debauchery and do what you like and reckless living and, hey, eat, drink, tomorrow we die, let's just party, you know. Fill your life with that stuff. Versus fill your life with God. I'll tell you which one satisfies. God satisfies completely. Alcohol satisfies temporarily, and then you're back in the same place again. And I say, he contrasts us. He says you need to be full of God in your life, not full of the world and all the stuff the world does. So I don't think he's just addressing alcohol as such. I think he's talking about lifestyle. What are you aiming to fill your life with? You know? And folks, there is a wonderful verse that I think we need to take on board about when you talk about how can I be full of God in my life? How can I have him so personal that I can feel him? I can sense him and I can experience him. Because to be perfectly honest, an academic understanding of God that's just focused from here is not satisfying for anything. We need to experience him in our lives. And how can we do that? There's one key verse that I find is brilliant for helping point us in the right direction. John chapter 14 and verse 21 says this, whoever has my commands and keeps them is the one who loves me. And the one who loves me will be loved by my Father, and I too will love them and show myself to them. You know what he's saying there? If you will take a step forward in your relationship with God, if you will make some movement towards him as a commitment to value him and to begin to believe in him and to begin to love him, he will make the corresponding step towards you and reveal himself to you. But it doesn't work without a two-way street here. You have to be committed to him if you want him to be committed to you. You've got to be able to come to him with something to offer him. You're willing to offer him your belief and your love if you want him to offer something back to you. Relationships don't work where one's a giver and the other's a taker, right? It does not work that way, and God doesn't do relationship that way. You've got to be committed. That's why the advice given to me when I was non-Christian, you won't find what you're looking for until you've made a commitment to Christ, was absolutely true. You've got to start there and make that commitment. Then he will begin to show himself to you. So folks, I just want to tie this up here, okay? Just from what we've learnt this morning, all right? Walking in wisdom means living today based on a true understanding of what's happening around me and what's coming, and making decisions that fit that reality. And we can, if God is with us. And Paul's advice was, wake up, first step, if you're not there. And folks, I want to bring a challenge here this morning. There is no other way we can come to God but to get out of our seat and cross the floor and make a commitment. That's what I had to do. I had to get out of my seat and go to the front and make a commitment. I had to take a step of commitment in that direction. I am committing myself. I am going to put my faith in Jesus. And that was the day the door opened. And I want to encourage you, if you have not done that, you'll stay asleep. Make today the day where you do that. And I want to pray with you. So after the service, please come and catch me at the front. I want to pray with you. Make that decision. Okay? Secondly, for all of us, make the most of every opportunity you have in life, because you never know when circumstances may change. Make it your passion to understand and do God's will in your life. It's the greatest security any of us could have. And don't look to the world to satisfy you at all. It won't. Okay?